How a tiny peninsula forged an empire that changed the world, the paradox of power. Empires rise and fall like the tides of time. Their names resound through the centuries. Rome, Persia, Britain, the colossal forces that shaped the world's destiny. Yet one of history's most extraordinary empires began not in vast plains or mighty cities, but on a rugged, windswept peninsula at the northern edge of the Greek world, a land of shepherds and warriors, dismissed by its southern neighbours as little more than a barbaric fringe. From these unforgiving hills would emerge two of the most brilliant military minds in human history, a father who forged a weapon unlike any the world had seen, and a son who would wield it to conquer everything before him. In a single generation, they would sweep aside the great Persian Empire, uniting the Greek world under one banner and carrying their culture across 3 continents. But this story is more than conquest. It's a story of transformation, of how a small, overlooked kingdom turned its isolation into strength, its ambition into destiny, and its brief empire into a legacy that would outlive all others. What began in Macedon would echo through philosophy, science, language, and art for millennia. This is the story of how a tiny peninsula forged an empire that changed the world. Chapter 1. The Forging of the Weapon. In the 4th century BC, Greece was fractured. The glory of Athens and Sparta had faded into memory, their unity shattered by generations of civil war. The Peloponnesian conflict had drained the city-states of men, money, and will. Once the pride of civilization, Greece was now a mosaic of rivals, proud, eloquent, and exhausted. To the north lay a land the southern Greeks barely considered civilized, Macedon. Its people spoke a rough dialect, worshipped in old ways, and followed kings instead of councils. To Athenians, they were barbarians, crude mountain folk beyond the pale of true Greek refinement. Yet in those mountains, something was stirring. In 359 BC, the throne of Macedon passed to a young man of 23 named Philip II. His brother had fallen in battle, his army destroyed, and enemies closed in from every side. The kingdom was on the edge of collapse, but Philip was no ordinary prince. During his youth, as a hostage in Thebes, he had studied under the great general Epaminondas, witnessing firsthand how discipline, strategy, and innovation could reshape the art of war. When he returned home, Philip set out to do what no Macedonian ruler had dared: rebuild his kingdom from the ground up. His vision began with the army. The old Macedonian militia, farmers with spears, was transformed into a professional force. Soldiers trained year-round and fought not for clan or city, but for their king. Philip equipped them with a new weapon, the sarissa, an 18-foot pike so long it demanded 2 hands to wield. These soldiers formed the Macedonian phalanx, a bristling wall of spear points that could advance like a living machine. In battle, the phalanx was terrifying, the first 5 ranks presenting an impenetrable forest of iron. Against it, traditional Greek hoplites were powerless. But Philip understood that even this mighty formation had weaknesses. So he surrounded it with flexibility, light infantry, archers, and above all, his elite companion cavalry, armoured horsemen trained to deliver the hammer blow once the enemy was pinned in place. This combination, the hammer and anvil, made Macedon unstoppable. Under Philip's banner, his army crushed raiders to the north and seized Greek coastal cities, securing rich gold and silver mines to fund his campaigns. His cunning extended beyond the battlefield. He bribed rivals, forged alliances, and used diplomacy as deftly as his sword. "No fortress," he boasted, "is impregnable if a donkey laden with gold can reach its gate." By 338 BC, the Greek city-states had finally recognized the danger. Athens and Thebes united to stop the Macedonian advance at Chaeronea. The battle that followed was a masterpiece. Philip feigned retreat, luring the Athenians into disorder. And at that exact moment, his cavalry, led by his 18-year-old son Alexander, thundered into the exposed flank. The Allied army shattered. Greece lay broken. Philip, now master of the Hellenic world, founded the League of Corinth, proclaiming a bold new mission, a crusade to avenge Greece and conquer Persia itself. The weapon had been forged, and its blade now pointed east. But fate would intervene. In 336 BC, at his daughter's wedding, Philip II was struck down by an assassin's blade. The dream of conquest might have died with him, were it not for the young prince who picked up his father's sword. Chapter 2. The Conqueror, the Age of Alexander. When Philip II fell beneath an assassin's blade, the Macedonian court erupted in chaos. Nobles whispered of conspiracy, rivals circled like vultures. The unity Philip had built seemed ready to unravel overnight. But among the confusion stood a young man who refused to flinch, Alexander, the 20-year-old heir to the greatest army in the Greek world. To many, he was still a boy, impulsive, untested, overshadowed by his father's genius. But within days, he silenced every doubt. He seized the throne, eliminated rivals, and quelled rebellion with terrifying precision. When the proud city of Thebes rose against him, Alexander marched south at lightning speed, surrounded the city and razed it to the ground. 6,000 perished. The rest were sold into slavery. The message was clear: Macedon's rule would not be questioned. Greece bowed once more, and the League of Corinth pledged its loyalty to their new commander. Then, like his father before him, Alexander turned his gaze east, across the narrow straits of the Hellespont, toward the vast Persian Empire. In 334 BC, he crossed into Asia with an army of 35,000 men, most of them veterans of Philip's campaigns. Before setting foot on the Asian shore, he performed a ritual, throwing a spear into the soil and declaring it "Spear Won Land." To his soldiers, it was a symbol of destiny. To Alexander, it was a vow. The first test came at the Battle of the Granicus River, where the Persians blocked his path with cavalry massed along the steep banks. Conventional wisdom would have counselled caution. Alexander charged straight through the river. His horsemen fought uphill, clashing in the swirling current, their armour glinting beneath the sun. Amid the chaos, Alexander's spear struck down the Persian commander. The enemy line collapsed. Asia Minor was open. As his army advanced, city after city surrendered. In each, Alexander showed both mercy and ruthlessness, welcoming those who submitted, annihilating those who resisted. He understood that reputation could travel faster than any army. A year later, he faced the great king himself. Darius III, ruler of the vast Achaemenid Empire, met him at Issus with an army that dwarfed Alexander's. The narrow coastal plain offered little room to maneuver, a disadvantage for the Persians. When the battle began, Alexander saw his chance. He led the companion cavalry in a thunderous wedge formation, driving directly toward the Persian center. He wasn't aiming to defeat the army. He was aiming to kill the king. The charge cut through the royal guard. Alexander's spear shattered, but he pressed forward, striking down Darius's chariot driver. The great king panicked and fled. His army, seeing their leader vanish in a cloud of dust, broke and scattered. The unimaginable had happened. The mighty Persian Empire had been humbled by a young monarch from a mountain kingdom. If you love deep dives into history like this, stories of empires, strategy, and the minds that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an episode. After Issus, Alexander could have marched east into Persia itself. Instead, he turned south. He knew the Persian navy still controlled the Mediterranean, and to destroy it, he needed the coastline. The next obstacle was the island fortress of Tyre. half a mile offshore, surrounded by high walls and the open sea. Alexander ordered the impossible. His engineers began building a massive causeway stone by stone across the waves. For 7 months they laboured as Tyrian ships rained fire from above. When the causeway finally reached the island, siege towers rolled forward and battering rams pounded the gates. The walls fell. The city burned. Alexander's message to the world was unmistakable. No fortress, no distance, and no king could defy him. From Tyre, he marched into Egypt, where the people, long weary of Persian rule, welcomed him as a liberator. At the Siwa oasis, priests of Amun hailed him as the son of a god. Alexander embraced the divine title. Near the Nile Delta, he founded a new city, Alexandria, a shining port he envisioned as a bridge between worlds. Yet even as his legend grew, so did his ambition. The true confrontation still awaited, far to the east, on the plains of Gaugamela, where Alexander would face Darius once more and decide the fate of the ancient world. Chapter 3. Gaugamela, the battle that broke an empire. By 331 BC, the legend of Alexander had spread like wildfire across the ancient world. From the shores of the Aegean to the deserts of Egypt, one name dominated the whispers of merchants, scholars, and soldiers alike. The Macedonian king had done the unthinkable, defeated the armies of Persia, liberated the Greek cities of Asia Minor, and captured the coastal empires that once fed Darius's mighty fleet. Yet the great king still lived, and as long as Darius drew breath, the war was not over. In the summer heat, Alexander's army marched eastward through the Tigris plains. The men were battle-hardened but weary, following their young king into the heart of the world's largest empire. Ahead lay Gaugamela, a wide plain near the ancient city of Arbela, the place Darius had chosen for his final stand. There, he gathered forces from every corner of his vast dominion: Persian nobles, Babylonian infantry, Indian war elephants, Bactrian cavalry, Scythian horse archers, perhaps 200,000 men in all. The great king would meet the invader with the full power of Persia's crown. Alexander's army numbered scarcely 40,000, but they were professionals, drilled, disciplined, and utterly devoted. Before the battle, Darius ordered the plain smoothed and cleared to give his scythed chariots room to maneuver. Alexander watched calmly as the Persians prepared the killing field. Then, on the night before the fight, while Darius performed sacrifices and his men muttered prayers, Alexander slept soundly. When one of his generals asked how he could rest before such odds, Alexander replied, "How could I not? We have already won." At dawn, the two armies faced each other under a blood-red sky. The Persians stretched wide across the plain, attempting to outflank the smaller Macedonian force. Alexander arrayed his men in a flexible oblique formation, angling his right wing forward and his left back, forcing Darius to extend his line ever further. The stage was set. The great king unleashed his chariots first. They charged forward, blades flashing from their wheels, trumpets blared, dust rose like smoke. But the Macedonians stood firm. Gaps opened in their ranks as trained soldiers stepped aside, letting the chariots race through before turning to strike them from behind. The deadly machines were rendered useless within minutes. Then came the cavalry. Thousands of Persian horsemen thundered toward Alexander's right wing. As they clashed, Alexander executed the maneuver that would immortalize his name. He rode ahead with his companion cavalry, drawing the Persian left wing farther and farther out until the entire enemy line stretched thin, and then, in a moment of pure tactical genius, he wheeled sharply left, driving straight for the Persian center. In the heart of the field, Darius III stood tall in his chariot, surrounded by the royal guard. He could see the silver flash of armor as Alexander's wedge formation cut through the dust like an arrow. The Macedonian king aimed directly for him. Spears shattered, horses screamed, and the lines broke. For the second time in his life, Darius turned and fled. His chariot sped from the field, and with it, the morale of the Persian army collapsed. Chaos consumed the battlefield. On the flanks, the Persian cavalry still fought fiercely, unaware their center was gone. Alexander, victorious, could have pursued Darius then and there, but a crisis erupted on his left. His ally Parmenion was under heavy attack. Torn between glory and duty, Alexander chose loyalty, wheeling his forces to save his general. By the time he returned, Darius had vanished into the east, his empire dying behind him. The victory at Gaugamela was total. Persia, the superpower of the ancient world for 2 centuries, was broken. Babylon opened its gates in surrender. Susa, the empire's treasure city, fell next. Then Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenids, the beating heart of their civilization. There, Alexander did something both symbolic and shocking. He ordered the city burned, a deliberate act of revenge for the Persian sack of Athens 150 years before. Flames devoured the palaces of kings, and the smoke of Persia's glory rose into the night sky. The Achaemenid Empire had ended in fire. Yet even as the embers cooled, Alexander's hunger grew. He had conquered the world's greatest empire, but now he dreamed of reaching its edge. The horizon called to him, the uncharted lands beyond the mountains of the east. The gods of his ancestors had told of a limit to the world. Alexander intended to find it. Chapter 4. Into the east, the edge of the known world. The Persian Empire was gone. Its capitals lay silent, its treasures seized, its armies broken. But for Alexander, conquest was never merely about victory. It was about transcendence. In the ruins of Persepolis, he gazed eastward toward lands his maps barely named. To his followers, he was already the master of the world. To Alexander, the world itself still felt incomplete. He set out from Persia in 330 BC, leading his men across deserts, mountains, and the very limits of endurance. The campaign that followed would test not only his genius, but the loyalty of every soldier who followed him. They marched through the Zagros Mountains, where scorching days and freezing nights claimed men and horses alike. They crossed rivers that swallowed bridges and deserts where men drank their own urine to survive. Yet Alexander pressed on, driven by something deeper than ambition. He pursued the fleeing Darius III, determined to end the old king's reign himself. But before Alexander could find him, fate intervened. Darius was betrayed and murdered by his own satrap, Bessus, who sought to claim the Persian throne. When Alexander found Darius's corpse, he wept. Then with brutal precision, he hunted down Bessus, captured him, and had him executed in the Persian manner, his body torn apart by 2 trees bent and released. The message was clear. Alexander was no longer a foreign conqueror. He was the rightful heir to Persia. In Babylon, he had been hailed as King of Asia. Now he began to act like one. He adopted Persian dress, customs, and ceremony. He appointed local nobles to his court and ordered his soldiers to bow in the Persian style, proskynesis, before him. To the Greeks, this was unthinkable. He was their general, not a god-king. Murmurs spread through the ranks. But Alexander's vision was greater than tradition. He dreamed of a fusion empire, one that united East and West under a single civilization. From the Persian heartlands, he pushed deeper into Central Asia, into modern-day Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, a region of rugged hills and endless rebellion. The cities of Bactria and Sogdiana resisted fiercely, forcing Alexander into a long, bloody campaign of sieges and ambushes. Here, his leadership turned from brilliance to obsession. His army fought not glorious battles but grueling guerrilla wars, chasing invisible enemies through mountain passes. It was here that Alexander met Roxana, a noblewoman of Bactria. He married her, a political and personal union that shocked his generals but symbolized his dream of cultural unity. Yet as his empire expanded, so did his paranoia. Conspiracies, real and imagined, plagued him. When his lifelong friend and commander Parmenion was accused of treason, Alexander ordered him killed without trial. Soon after, in a drunken rage, he slew another friend, Clytus the Black, the very man who had saved his life at the Granicus. The banquet fell silent. For the first time, the soldiers saw not their godlike king, but a man haunted by the weight of his own legend. Still, Alexander's momentum could not be stopped. By 327 BC, he set his eyes on the final frontier, India. Beyond the Hindu Kush, the mighty Indus River marked the edge of the known world. Crossing it was like stepping into myth. Monsoons drenched the army, insects, heat and disease claimed the weary. Yet when they faced King Porus on the banks of the Hydaspes River, Alexander showed the same brilliance that had carried him since Chaeronea. Porus's war elephants thundered through the mud, shaking the earth. But Alexander, using the cover of a storm, crossed the river upstream and struck from an unexpected direction. His cavalry outflanked the elephants, his archers rained death from afar. It was one of the most brutal battles of his career, fought knee-deep in rain and blood. When Porus was captured, Alexander, impressed by his valor, asked how he wished to be treated. "Like a king," Porus replied. Alexander smiled and granted his wish. The victory was glorious but costly. His men had marched thousands of miles, through deserts and jungles, over mountains and rivers. Their armor was rusting, their spirit was breaking. When Alexander declared his intention to march further east, to the Ganges, to lands no Greek had ever seen, the army refused. It was not rebellion, it was exhaustion. For the first and only time, Alexander turned back. Standing at the Hyphasis River, staring into the unknown, he realized that even the greatest conqueror must one day bow to the limits of men. He poured a libation to the gods and began the long march home. The journey back was a nightmare. Through the Gedrosian desert, thousands died of thirst and hunger. The empire he had forged now stretched from Greece to India, but its creator was fading, worn down by wounds, fever, and the crushing solitude of command. When Alexander finally returned to Babylon, he was no longer the invincible young king who had crossed the Hellespont. He was a man who had touched the edge of the world and found that there was nothing there but dust and memory. Chapter 5. Empire of Ashes, the death of a god. Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, shimmered beneath the desert sun as Alexander returned, triumphant yet hollow. The city's towering ziggurats and wide processional streets were lined with cheering crowds. Incense filled the air. The people hailed him not just as a conqueror, but as a living god. He had crossed the ends of the earth and returned with an empire spanning continents. Yet, behind the golden facade, something in him had begun to fracture. Years of relentless campaign had taken their toll. Alexander's once youthful face was scarred and hardened, his eyes restless, his body worn thin by fever and wounds. He had achieved what no man before him could, but there were no more worlds left to conquer. Instead of peace, he found emptiness. The constant drive that had fueled his brilliance had become an endless hunger. He threw himself into administration, trying to shape his vast empire into something lasting. In Babylon, he began building a new capital, one that would fuse East and West into a single civilization. He appointed satraps from both Greek and Persian backgrounds, encouraged intermarriage, and planned massive infrastructure projects to unite his domains. He spoke of exploring the Arabian Peninsula, of circumnavigating Africa, of finding the source of the Nile. His imagination knew no boundaries, but not all shared his vision. Many of his Macedonian officers, veterans who had fought with him since youth, began to resent his Persianizing habits, the robes, the ceremonies, the demand that even Greeks bow before him. They whispered that their king had gone mad, that he had forgotten who he was. To Alexander, it was they who had failed to see the bigger picture. He no longer saw himself as a Macedonian or even a Greek, but as something beyond both. In 324 BC, he organized one of the most extraordinary social experiments in ancient history, the mass wedding at Susa. More than 10,000 of his officers and soldiers married Persian noblewomen in a single ceremony. Alexander himself took 2 new wives, Statera, daughter of Darius, and Parysatis, daughter of the previous Persian king. It was a symbolic act of unity, an empire joined not by conquest, but by blood. But within the ranks, resentment simmered. The old soldiers saw their Greek identity dissolving into something foreign. As if sensing their unease, Alexander began to act with increasing suspicion. Old friends fell to accusations of treachery. The same man who once wept for fallen enemies now executed loyal companions for imagined plots. In his isolation, he turned more frequently to wine, deep, consuming feasts that lasted for days. The legend of the philosopher king was fading, replaced by the myth of the god intoxicated by his own power. In the spring of 323 BC, Alexander returned to Babylon, preparing for a new expedition. He planned to march south into Arabia, to extend his empire to the very rim of the known world. He held council with his generals, reviewed fleets, and gave sacrifices to the gods. But the omens were dark. Strange portents filled the skies. A crown blew from his head into the river. A man sat upon his throne unbidden, claiming it was fate's command. Alexander dismissed the superstitions, but the ancient world was listening. After a banquet that stretched long into the night, he was struck by a sudden fever. Some said it was malaria, others whispered poison. For 10 days, he burned. His voice weakened, his strength ebbed away. Even as his body failed, he continued issuing orders, planning campaigns, dictating visions of exploration and empire. His generals stood in silence around his bed, too afraid to ask what they all wondered: who would rule when he was gone? On the final day, when his commanders pressed him for an answer, Alexander whispered the words that would ignite generations of chaos: to the strongest. Moments later, the greatest conqueror of the ancient world was gone. He was 32 years old. Outside his chamber, the empire he had built began to tremble. The soldiers refused to believe he was dead, saying their king had merely ascended to the gods. In the streets of Babylon, they wailed and tore their clothes. His body, preserved in honey and gold, was carried away in a magnificent funeral procession. Its destination disputed, its symbolism eternal. Alexander had built an empire that spanned from the Adriatic to the Indus, but its foundation rested on his will alone. With his death, that foundation cracked. Within months, his generals began to plot. The dream of unity would soon dissolve into blood and betrayal. The god was gone, and what remained was an empire of ashes. Chapter 6: The War of the Successors, when Titans Collide. The death of Alexander was like the shattering of a star. The light of his conquests still burned, but the force that held it together was gone. His empire, the largest the world had ever seen, was not a nation but an idea embodied in a single man. Without him, that idea began to collapse. In the vast palace of Babylon, his generals, the Diadochi, meaning successors, gathered to decide the fate of their master's realm. They were men forged in Alexander's shadow: Perdiccas, his loyal cavalry commander; Ptolemy, shrewd and calculating; Seleucus, patient and cunning; Antigonus, a battle-hardened titan; and Cassander, ambitious and cold. Around them lay maps stretching from Greece to India, but no one strong enough to rule them all. At first, they tried to preserve the illusion of unity. Alexander's half-brother, Aridaeus, mentally unfit to rule, was declared king alongside Alexander IV, the unborn son of Roxana. Perdiccas acted as regent, claiming to protect the royal line. But in truth, every general already dreamed of carving out his own dominion. The age of conquest had ended. The age of ambition had begun. The first cracks appeared almost immediately. Ptolemy, stationed in Egypt, seized Alexander's body as it was being transported to Macedon. The funeral procession, a golden chariot drawn by 64 mules, was intercepted near Damascus. Ptolemy diverted it to Egypt, placing the body in a magnificent tomb at Memphis. In doing so, he claimed not only Alexander's remains, but his symbolic power. Babylon seethed. Perdiccas swore vengeance and marched on Egypt, but his army mutinied and killed him before he ever reached the Nile. The fragile unity collapsed completely. The Diadochi turned their armies on one another in a brutal struggle that spanned decades. Former comrades clashed in battles that mirrored the scale of Alexander's own campaigns. But now the banners bore his generals' names instead of his. Eumenes of Cardia, Alexander's loyal secretary, fought valiantly for the royal heirs but was betrayed and executed. The young Alexander IV, along with Roxana, was imprisoned and later murdered. The bloodline of the great Conqueror was extinguished. The wars raged across the shattered empire. In Asia, Antigonus the One-Eyed sought to reunite the lands under his rule. In Europe, Cassander tightened his grip over Macedon and Greece. In the east, Seleucus seized control of the former Persian territories, founding a realm that stretched from Babylon to India. Each claimed to be Alexander's true successor. Each sought to wear his mantle. The result was a maelstrom of betrayal, siege, and shifting alliances, a generation of soldiers fighting for the ghost of a man they once followed together. By 301 BC, the power struggle reached its climax at the Battle of Ipsus in Asia Minor. Antigonus, nearly 80 years old, faced a coalition of his rivals, Seleucus and Lysimachus among them. The clash was titanic. War elephants inherited from Alexander's eastern campaigns thundered across the field, scattering cavalry and crushing men underfoot. When the dust cleared, Antigonus was dead, struck down by a javelin, his empire reduced to fragments. In the aftermath, a new map of the world emerged. The once united Macedonian realm was now divided into three great kingdoms: the Antigonid dynasty in Macedon, the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, and the Seleucid Empire stretching across Asia. These Hellenistic monarchies would dominate the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries, carrying forward Alexander's legacy even as they fought endlessly over it. The dream of unity had died, but in its place rose something unexpected, a new kind of civilization. The Greek world had fused with the East, creating a cosmopolitan order where soldiers, scholars, and merchants moved freely between continents. The wars had torn Alexander's empire apart, but they had also spread his culture farther than he could ever have imagined. If you're enjoying this journey through the rise and fall of empires, the ambition, the battles, the legacies that shaped our world, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps more history lovers discover these stories. From the chaos of the Diadochi would emerge the true inheritance of Macedon, not a single ruler, but a world transformed by the ideas, languages, and ambitions Alexander had set in motion. The Age of Kings was giving birth to the Hellenistic age, an era of dazzling brilliance where the sword gave way to science and empire was measured not in miles, but in minds. Chapter 7. The Hellenistic Dawn, a world transformed. Out of the wreckage of Alexander's empire rose something extraordinary. The swords of the Successors had divided the world, but in doing so, they had also sown the seeds of a new civilization, one neither wholly Greek nor wholly Eastern, but a dazzling fusion of both. This was the Hellenistic world, and it would redefine what it meant to be civilized. In the cities founded by Alexander and his generals, Greek culture took root in foreign soil. From the sands of Egypt to the plains of Mesopotamia, marble temples rose beside ancient ziggurats. Greek became the language of commerce, diplomacy, and learning. For the first time in history, the known world spoke with one tongue. Soldiers, philosophers, and merchants could travel from Athens to the Indus and still find people who shared their ideas. The new Hellenistic kingdoms became laboratories of culture and science. In Egypt, Ptolemy I established his dynasty, ruling from the glittering city of Alexandria, the crown jewel of the Mediterranean. Its great harbour teemed with ships from every corner of the world. Looming above the sea stood the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders, its fire guiding sailors by night and day. But Alexandria's true beacon was not its flame. It was its knowledge. Here, Ptolemy founded the Library of Alexandria, a sanctuary for the mind. Within its marble halls, scrolls from every civilization were collected, translated, and studied. Greek scholars mingled with Egyptian priests, Babylonian astronomers, and Jewish philosophers, exchanging ideas that would shape human thought for centuries. Euclid wrote The Elements, the foundational text of geometry. Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the Earth with astonishing precision using shadows and distance. Aristarchus proposed that the Earth revolved around the Sun, an idea that would not be accepted until 2,000 years later. Further east, in the Seleucid Empire, Greek and Persian traditions interwove into a new cosmopolitan culture. Cities like Antioch and Seleucia became crossroads of art and intellect, their marketplaces echoing with a dozen languages. Greek sculpture evolved, abandoning the serene perfection of classical forms for a new emotional realism. The marble figures of the Hellenistic age wept, strained, and rejoiced, capturing the complexity of human experience itself. Even in Macedon, under the Antigonid kings, this new world blossomed. The royal courts became centers of patronage where poets, scientists, and engineers thrived. The boundaries of empire had turned into bridges between civilizations. The Hellenistic world was no longer defined by the spear, but by the scroll. But beneath the grandeur lay fragility. The Hellenistic kingdoms were powerful, yet perpetually at war. Dynasties rose and fell through assassinations, intrigues, and shifting alliances. Each kingdom sought dominance, mirroring the ambition of the man whose empire they had inherited. And while the East glittered with wealth and learning, a new power was stirring in the West, a disciplined republic whose legions were beginning to march beyond the Italian peninsula. Rome was watching. For now, though, the Mediterranean basked in the afterglow of Alexander's dream. It was a world of innovation and exploration, of trade routes stretching from Spain to India, of ideas that leapt across oceans and deserts. It was a world where a merchant from Tyre might quote Aristotle, where Egyptian astronomers wrote in Greek, and where the descendants of Macedonian soldiers prayed to gods with Persian names. In the shadow of chaos, a new order had emerged, a civilization born from conquest, sustained by knowledge, and destined to pass its flame to the next empire that would rise. The age of Alexander's heirs had dawned, brilliant, fleeting, and unforgettable. Chapter 8. Alexandria, the city of light. If the Hellenistic world had a soul, it burned in Alexandria. Founded by Alexander himself at the mouth of the Nile, the city was more than a settlement, it was a statement. He had carved his name into the coast of eternity, declaring to future generations that this was the bridge between East and West, between the known and the unknown. After his death, the torch passed to the Ptolemies, who turned his vision into living stone. Under Ptolemy I and his successors, Alexandria became the greatest city on earth, a marvel of order, wealth, and wonder. Its streets were laid out in precise grids, wide enough for chariots to pass two abreast. Marble colonnades shaded the walkways, while statues of Greek gods watched over markets filled with spices from Arabia, ivory from Nubia, and silks from the distant east. The air smelled of salt and cedar and ink, the scent of empire and ideas. At the edge of the harbour stood the Pharos Lighthouse, an architectural miracle that rose more than 100 metres into the sky. Day and night, its flame blazed, visible for miles across the sea. For sailors, it was salvation. For philosophers, it was symbolism, the eternal fire of knowledge guiding humankind through the darkness. But the true heart of Alexandria was not its harbour, nor its palaces, it was the library. Attached to the great temple of the Muses, or Macedon, it was the world's first university, a sanctuary for thinkers, poets, and scientists. The Ptolemies sent ships across the Mediterranean with one mission: to collect every written work known to man. Any scrolls brought into Alexandria were copied. The originals remained in the library's vaults. Within those walls, knowledge became empire. Scholars worked in the open courtyards, surrounded by palm trees and marble statues. Astronomers charted the heavens, mathematicians debated the geometry of the cosmos. Here, Euclid defined the laws of space. Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference with uncanny accuracy, using only shadows and logic. Herophilus dissected the human body, mapping its organs and veins. It was in Alexandria that reason triumphed over superstition, where curiosity itself became sacred. The city also became a crucible for art and philosophy. Greek poets wrote hymns to Egyptian gods. Egyptian sculptors carved marble in Greek form. The blending of cultures created something entirely new, an international city where knowledge and creativity flourished beyond borders. In the royal court, Cleomenes of Naucratis managed trade, and Callimachus, the poet-scholar, catalogued 500,000 scrolls in the library. A feat so vast it was said that if the library's scrolls were laid end to end, they could stretch across the city. The Ptolemies spared no expense. They funded expeditions to explore the sources of the Nile, commissioned maps of the known world, and built observatories to study the stars. Alexandria was not just a city, it was a machine for discovery. And yet, even here, the seeds of decline were sown. The Ptolemies, who had once ruled wisely, began to turn inward, consumed by luxury and intrigue. The great library, so vast and precious, was vulnerable, its scrolls made of papyrus, its halls built of cedar and stone. A single spark could undo centuries of progress. Still, in its prime, Alexandria stood as a beacon unmatched in history. No other city had ever drawn the minds of the world together so completely. Greek philosophers, Egyptian priests, Persian astronomers, Jewish scholars, all seeking truth in the same marble halls. The city's motto could have been carved above its gates: "Let there be no limit to the human mind." Alexandria's light would shine for centuries, even when flames and conquest finally silenced its libraries. The ideas born there would travel onward, carried in books, in memory, in the minds of those who refused to let them die. The city was a dream of what humanity could become, a place where conquest gave way to curiosity, and where the empire of the sword became the empire of the mind. Chapter 9: The Philosophers and the Machine of Reason. When Alexander's armies conquered the world, they carried more than weapons. They carried ideas. And in the centuries that followed, those ideas began to evolve in ways no conqueror could have planned. The sword had united empires, but now philosophy and science would unite minds. The Hellenistic age marked the moment when curiosity itself became civilization's guiding force. The thinkers of this new era no longer sought to please the gods or glorify kings. They sought to understand the workings of nature, the patterns of logic, and the purpose of life. From the marble steps of Alexandria to the sunlit courtyards of Athens, scholars began asking questions that would echo through every age to come. At the heart of this transformation stood the Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of knowledge the ancient world had ever seen. Within its walls, human thought evolved from speculation to system. Euclid built the foundations of geometry. Eratosthenes, by measuring shadows in two cities at once, calculated the circumference of the Earth to within a few hundred miles. Herophilus studied the pulse, discovering that the rhythm of the heartbeat could be used to diagnose disease. In these marble halls, science was born. The old gods remained, but their power began to fade in the face of reason. For the first time, humanity looked at the heavens and saw not divine will, but order, patterns that could be measured, predicted, and explained. The astronomer Aristarchus proposed that the Earth itself moved around the Sun, a theory so bold it would not be proven for nearly 2 millennia. Others, like Archimedes in Syracuse, discovered the principles of mechanics and hydraulics, transforming the physical world into something that could be mastered. But this new age was not only about numbers and stars. The search for meaning continued in the realm of the soul. As the old city-states gave way to sprawling kingdoms, people began to feel adrift, citizens of vast empires rather than close-knit communities. Into this uncertainty stepped new schools of thought that sought to guide human life in a world too large to comprehend. Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium, taught that virtue and inner peace came from harmony with reason, that a wise person could remain tranquil amid chaos by accepting what could not be controlled. In contrast, Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus, argued that the highest good was not wealth or fame, but a life free of fear and pain, achieved through friendship, simplicity, and the quiet pursuit of truth. Together, these philosophies reshaped the moral compass of the ancient world. They were not just intellectual exercises, they were survival strategies for an age of uncertainty. The Hellenistic man could no longer rely on the polis for identity. He had to find it within himself. In that sense, philosophy became the new conquest, an empire of the mind as vast as any Alexander had carved with the sword. This was also the age when reason became machinery. The inventions of the Hellenistic engineers were astonishing. The Antikythera mechanism, a complex device of bronze gears, could predict the movements of the stars and the timing of eclipses, a clockwork universe imagined 2,000 years before Galileo. The Archimedean screw lifted water to irrigate fields. Early steam-powered toys hinted at future revolutions to come. The line between magic and science blurred as humanity learned to harness the rules that governed the cosmos. For the first time, knowledge was cumulative. One discovery built upon another. One idea sparked the next. The Greeks had sought truth. The Hellenistic world built systems to preserve and refine it. And though few could see it then, this relentless search for understanding, this machine of reason, would become the true legacy of the Hellenistic age. For while empires fall, ideas never die. Chapter 10: The Shadow of Rome. For nearly 3 centuries, the Hellenistic world had flourished. a constellation of kingdoms bound by a shared language, culture, and imagination. From the palaces of Alexandria to the citadels of Antioch and Pergamon, the heirs of Alexander ruled over a tapestry of civilizations united by Greek thought and Eastern grandeur. But by the 2nd century before Christ, the light of this world began to fade. In the West, a new power was stirring. Disciplined, relentless, and unlike anything the Greeks had ever faced. Its name was Rome. The Romans had long admired the Greeks. They studied their art, mimicked their architecture, and sent their sons to learn philosophy in Athens. But admiration did not mean mercy. Rome's legions had begun to roll across the Mediterranean, turning republic into empire. They fought not for glory, but for permanence. An empire built not on charisma, but on structure. Where Alexander had conquered through vision, Rome conquered through law. The first confrontation came in Greece itself. In 197 BC, the Roman general Titus Quinctius Flamininus defeated the Macedonian king Philip V at the Battle of Cynocephali. The Macedonian phalanx, once the unstoppable engine of conquest, met its match against the flexibility of the Roman legion. The long pikes of Macedon, deadly from the front, faltered when the legions slipped past their points and attacked from the sides. It was the beginning of the end. Soon after, the great Hellenistic powers fell one by one. The Seleucid Empire, weakened by internal strife and constant wars, was crushed by Rome in 190 BC at Magnesia. Macedon itself became a Roman province by 146 BC. The vast Seleucid territories fractured into petty kingdoms, while the once glorious cities of the East began to bow to Roman diplomacy or Roman steel. Yet the last flame of Hellenistic independence burned in Egypt. The Ptolemaic dynasty, descended from Alexander's general, ruled from Alexandria, now the richest city in the Mediterranean. Its rulers, however, had grown decadent and divided, more concerned with court intrigue than governance. By the 1st century BC, the throne had passed to Cleopatra VII, the lust of the Ptolemies, brilliant, multilingual, and shrewd. Cleopatra saw clearly what her ancestors had not, that Egypt's survival depended on Rome. She courted its most powerful men, first Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony, seeking alliance through charm and intellect. For a time, it seemed she might succeed. Together, Antony and Cleopatra dreamed of restoring the Eastern Empire under Egyptian leadership, a resurrection of Alexander's vision. But fate had other plans. In 31 BC, the forces of Antony and Cleopatra met those of Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, at the Battle of Actium off the coast of Greece. It was a clash not just of armies, but of worlds, the last Hellenistic monarchs against the birth of the Roman Empire. The battle was decisive. Octavian's fleet encircled and destroyed Antony's ships. Cleopatra fled, and within a year, both she and Antony were dead. Egypt, the final jewel of the Hellenistic world, fell to Rome. With Cleopatra's death, the curtain closed on the age that Alexander had begun. Rome stood unchallenged, its legions guarding an empire that stretched farther than even Macedon's wildest dreams. Yet, in conquering the Hellenistic world, Rome had also inherited it. Greek became the language of philosophy, science, and diplomacy in the Roman East. Roman gods took Greek names. Roman education was built on Greek thought. Even in victory, Rome bowed to the civilization it had consumed. The shadow of Rome grew long over the lands once ruled by Alexander's heirs. The libraries of Alexandria still burned bright, but the world beyond had changed. The age of discovery and intellect gave way to an age of empire and administration. The dream of cultural unity had not died. It had merely changed form. In the twilight of the Hellenistic kingdoms, one truth endured. Though the torch had passed from Macedon to Rome, it was still Greek fire that burned at its core. Chapter 11. The Legacy of the Greeks. The banners of Macedon had long fallen, and the marble palaces of the Hellenistic kings stood silent. Yet, even in ruin, the world they had built refused to fade. Empires rise and crumble, but ideas, once unleashed, do not die. The Hellenistic world had sown seeds that would flower for thousands of years, shaping art, science, and belief in ways its creators could never have imagined. The Romans, victorious in battle, found themselves conquered in spirit. They absorbed the culture of the Greeks so completely that Roman civilization became, in truth, a continuation of the Hellenistic one. The Roman elite learned Greek as the language of intellect. Senators quoted Homer and Plato. Generals decorated their villas with marble statues of Zeus and Athena. Roman religion itself fused with Greek mythology. Jupiter became Zeus in all but name, Venus mirrored Aphrodite, and Mars carried the echo of Ares. The influence went deeper still. Greek philosophy, revived in Roman schools, gave structure to the moral and political thought of the empire. The teachings of Stoicism, once the refuge of men adrift in a vast and uncertain world, now guided emperors. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of Rome at its height, kept a personal journal of Stoic reflections, later known as Meditations, in which he sought wisdom not in conquest, but in character. In his words, we hear the distant resonance of Zeno and Socrates, carried across centuries of empire. In art and science, the Greek spirit remained unbroken. Architects modelled Roman temples on Greek blueprints. Sculptors carved their gods with the same calm perfection that had graced the Acropolis. The physician Galen, studying in Alexandria, wrote medical treatises that would remain authoritative for 1,500 years. In astronomy, Ptolemy of Alexandria charted the heavens, his geocentric model shaping human understanding of the universe until the age of Copernicus. Even the great shift that would define the next 2 millennia, the rise of Christianity, was carried on the currents of Hellenistic culture. The New Testament was written in Koine Greek, the universal language of the Eastern Mediterranean, allowing its message to spread rapidly through the vast Roman world. The philosophical ideas of the Greeks gave early Christian thinkers a vocabulary to explore divinity, morality, and the nature of the soul. The faith that would one day dominate Europe was born in part from the intellectual soil of the Hellenistic age. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, much of this knowledge might have been lost forever. Libraries burned, cities crumbled, and Europe descended into darkness. But the light of the Greeks endured in the East, in Byzantium, where Greek remained the language of empire and scholarship, and later in the Islamic world, where scholars in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo preserved and expanded upon the works of Aristotle, Euclid, and Hippocrates. It was through them, through the translation of Greek texts into Arabic and Latin, that the wisdom of the ancient world was reborn in the Renaissance, sparking revolutions in art, science, and philosophy. When Renaissance thinkers spoke of rediscovering the classics, what they truly found was the voice of the Hellenistic world, refined, preserved, and waiting to speak again. From the geometry of Euclid to the ethics of Aristotle, from the astronomy of Eratosthenes to the reason of Socrates, the Greek inheritance became the foundation of Western thought. It shaped the modern vocabulary of politics, from democracy and tyranny to republic and philosophy. It gave us the language of reason, the discipline of science, and the pursuit of truth itself. The Greeks had sought to understand not just how the world worked, but why, a question that continues to drive human inquiry to this day. In every laboratory, courtroom, and classroom, their spirit endures. The Hellenistic age may have ended beneath the banners of Rome, but its soul became immortal, not through empire, but through enlightenment. Chapter 12. Echoes of Macedon, the empire that never died. More than 2,000 years have passed since a young king from a small peninsula set out to change the world. His empire, carved in a single lifetime, crumbled within a generation. His cities fell, his statues shattered, his armies vanished into dust. Yet somehow, Alexander's dream never truly died. It lived on, not in territory, but in thought, not in borders, but in ideas. The world he conquered was transformed forever. The cultures that once stood apart, Greek, Persian, Egyptian, Indian, began to blend into a single current of civilization. From that current flowed the traditions, sciences, and philosophies that shape the modern age. Even as new empires rose upon the ruins of the old, they built on the foundations laid by Macedon's sons. Walk through any modern city, its avenues lined with columns, its universities teaching logic, its courts debating justice, and you can still feel the echo of that transformation. The words we use to define power, freedom, and knowledge, democracy, philosophy, history, politics, are the inheritance of that Hellenistic world. Its influence threads through everything. In the laws of Rome, the scriptures of Christianity, the discoveries of the Renaissance, and the very scientific method that governs our understanding of reality. In this sense, the empire never ended. The physical realm of Alexander was only the spark. The true conquest began when ideas replaced armies, when the spear became the stylus, and when curiosity conquered the world more completely than any sword ever could. Through centuries of change, the spirit of Macedon endured, reshaped, reinterpreted, reborn. It lived in Byzantine scholars copying the works of Aristotle, in Muslim astronomers charting the stars over Baghdad, in European philosophers rediscovering logic and humanism. The thread runs unbroken from the marble steps of Athens to the observatories of modern science. Today, historians see Alexander not just as a conqueror, but as a catalyst, a man whose ambition accidentally created the first truly global civilization. His empire taught the ancient world to communicate, trade, and think beyond the limits of tribe or kingdom. And though his life burned brief as a comet, the light he left behind still illuminates the night sky of human history. The great irony of Macedon is that its mightiest victories came not from the sword, but from the mind. For in the end, Alexander's greatest achievement was not the destruction of the Persian Empire, but the birth of a new world, a world that would, in time, give rise to all the revolutions of reason and art that followed. If this journey through the rise of Macedon and the world it reshaped changed how you see history, share it with someone who would appreciate this story, and subscribe to join us as we explore more empires, ideas, and legacies that built our modern world. The story of Alexander and his age reminds us that every civilization, no matter how small its beginning, can reshape the course of humanity. The echo of Macedon still reverberates in our languages, our learning, our very way of seeing the world. Empires may fall, but ideas endure, and in that endurance lies immortality.